Imagine yourself standing on the wooden deck of a warship, the Mediterranean sun beating down mercilessly as the smell of salt and tar fills your nostrils. The year is 1571, and before you stretches an ocean that has witnessed the rise and fall of empires, the clash of civilizations, and the eternal struggle between East and West. You are about to witness something extraordinary, a battle that will determine whether Christian Europe survives or falls beneath the shadow of the crescent moon. This is not merely another naval engagement in a forgotten corner of history. This is the moment when the fate of Western civilization hangs by a thread, when the greatest empire the world has known sends its undefeated armada to crush the last fragments of resistance, and when a revolutionary weapon will shatter centuries of naval doctrine and change warfare forever. The Ottoman Empire in 1571 stands as a colossus astride 3 continents, an unstoppable juggernaut that has conquered lands from the Persian Gulf to the gates of Vienna, from the deserts of Arabia to the heart of Hungary. Under Sultan Selim II, the empire represents the pinnacle of military sophistication, administrative brilliance, and raw, terrifying power. For more than 2 centuries, the Ottomans have expanded relentlessly, their armies seemingly invincible, their fleets unchallenged masters of the Mediterranean. When Ottoman soldiers march, cities tremble. When their galleys row into harbor, coastal populations flee inland. The very name Ottoman has become synonymous with military excellence, and their naval dominance has transformed the Mediterranean into what many now call the Ottoman Lake. The Christian kingdoms of Europe watch helplessly as port after port falls, as trade routes are severed, as their ships are captured or destroyed by an enemy that appears unstoppable. The Ottoman naval forces represent a perfection of galley warfare refined over generations of constant combat. Their ships are manned by highly trained crews, powered by thousands of enslaved oarsmen, who row with mechanical precision under the lash of their overseers. Each galley carries elite janissaries, Christian boys taken in childhood, converted to Islam, and trained to become the most feared infantry in the world. These are not ordinary soldiers. These are men who know no fear, who have been conditioned from youth to view death in battle as the highest honor, who fight with a ferocity that has broken army after army across dozens of battlefields. When an Ottoman galley closes with an enemy vessel, the outcome is rarely in doubt. The janissaries board with ruthless efficiency, their scimitars flashing in the Mediterranean sun, cutting through resistance like a hot knife through butter. This tactic, closing rapidly, boarding aggressively, overwhelming the enemy through superior close-quarters combat, has worked flawlessly for centuries. Why would they change it now? The strategic genius of the Ottoman Empire extends far beyond simple military prowess. Their administrative systems are the envy of Europe, their logistical capabilities unmatched. While European kingdoms struggle with corrupt bureaucracies and inefficient tax collection, the Ottoman state operates with clockwork precision. Resources flow from the vast territories under their control: timber from the Black Sea forests, grain from Egyptian fields, iron from Anatolian mines, men from every corner of their enormous empire. They can build ships faster than their enemies can sink them, raise armies larger than entire European populations, and sustain military campaigns that would bankrupt lesser powers. Their intelligence networks penetrate deep into Christian territories, bringing detailed information about enemy movements, political divisions, and military weaknesses. When the Ottomans plan a campaign, they do so with comprehensive knowledge and overwhelming resources. This combination of tactical brilliance, strategic vision, and logistical superiority has made them appear invincible. But across the Mediterranean, in the fractured kingdoms of Christian Europe, a different story unfolds, one of division, suspicion, and bitter rivalry. The Protestant Reformation has shattered the unity of Christendom, setting Catholic against Protestant, kingdom against kingdom, in religious wars that have consumed the continent for decades. The Holy Roman Empire is torn by internal conflicts. France, though Catholic, pursues its own interests and even maintains diplomatic relations with the Ottomans against other Christian powers. The Italian states squabble over trade routes and territories. Spain struggles with rebellions in the Netherlands. England, newly Protestant, stands apart from Catholic Europe. This is not a unified civilization prepared to defend itself. This is a collection of rival powers more interested in fighting each other than confronting the common threat that grows stronger with each passing year. Yet two powers cannot ignore the Ottoman advance. Venice, the maritime republic that has dominated Mediterranean trade for centuries, watches with growing alarm as Ottoman fleets strangle its commerce and threaten its overseas possessions. The Venetians are merchants and traders, but they are also skilled sailors and experienced naval fighters. They understand that Ottoman dominance means the death of Venetian prosperity. Spain, the other great Catholic power, recognizes the existential threat. Spanish territories ring the Mediterranean: Sicily, southern Italy, the coast of North Africa. Spanish trade depends on safe passage through waters increasingly controlled by Ottoman galleys. King Philip II of Spain understands that the Ottoman advance must be stopped, but he also understands that Spain alone cannot accomplish this task. The Ottoman Empire is simply too powerful, too vast, too well organized for any single Christian power to defeat. The crisis reaches its terrible climax with the fall of Cyprus. This wealthy Venetian possession, strategically positioned in the eastern Mediterranean, becomes the target of an Ottoman campaign in 1570. The siege of Famagusta lasts nearly a year, with the Venetian defenders displaying extraordinary courage against overwhelming odds. When the city finally falls in August 1571, the Ottoman forces commit an atrocity that shocks all of Europe. The Venetian commander, Marcantonio Bragadin, who had been promised safe conduct, is instead subjected to horrific torture. His ears and nose cut off before he is flayed alive in the public square. His skin, stuffed with straw, is paraded through Ottoman territories as a trophy. This barbaric act sends shockwaves through Christian Europe, transforming what had been a distant strategic concern into a visceral, emotional demand for action and revenge. In Rome, Pope Pius V watches these events with deepening horror and determination. A Dominican friar who had served as Grand Inquisitor before his elevation to the papacy, Pius V combines deep religious conviction with political acumen. He understands that Christian Europe faces an existential crisis, that without unity, the Mediterranean will become an Ottoman lake, and that the opportunity to resist may soon pass forever. The fall of Cyprus and the martyrdom of Bragadin provide him with the emotional catalyst needed to overcome centuries of Christian division and rivalry. He begins a diplomatic campaign that will test every skill he possesses, reaching out to the Catholic powers of Europe with a message that transcends political differences. Unite now, or face destruction separately. The formation of what will become known as the Holy League represents a diplomatic miracle. Pope Pius V must navigate treacherous waters, balancing competing interests, soothing wounded pride, and overcoming deep suspicions between powers that have been enemies almost as often as they have been allies. Venice and Spain, the principal powers, have their own complex relationship. Sometimes partners, sometimes rivals, always wary of each other's ambitions. The Papal States, though influential, lack the military resources of the larger kingdoms. The smaller Italian states, Genoa, Savoy, the Knights of Malta, must be convinced to contribute ships and men. Each power calculates its own interests, weighs the costs and benefits, considers alternatives. The negotiations drag on through months of 1571 while Ottoman power continues to grow, and the Mediterranean becomes increasingly unsafe for Christian shipping. Pius V employs every tool at his disposal. He appeals to religious unity, reminding Catholic powers of their shared faith and the threat posed by Islamic expansion. He offers material incentives, financial subsidies, promises of future support, Guarantees of papal favor. He leverages the emotional impact of Ottoman atrocities, ensuring that news of Bragadin's fate spreads throughout Europe. Stoking outrage and fear. He threatens spiritual consequences for those who refuse to join the crusade, hinting at excommunication for rulers who prioritize political concerns over Christian solidarity. Most importantly, he works tirelessly to build trust between Venice and Spain, the two powers whose participation is absolutely essential. Without Venice's naval expertise and Spain's military might, no league can hope to challenge Ottoman dominance. Finally, in May 1571, the Holy League is formally established. The agreement brings together Spain, Venice, the Papal States, Genoa, Savoy, the Knights of Malta, and several smaller Italian principalities in a military alliance dedicated to confronting Ottoman expansion in the Mediterranean. The terms of the agreement specify contributions from each member: ships, soldiers, supplies, money. Spain and Venice will provide the bulk of the fleet. The Papal States will contribute financial support and their own galleys. The smaller members will send what they can. More importantly, the agreement establishes a unified command structure, avoiding the chaos that has doomed previous Christian naval efforts when competing commanders pursued their own strategies rather than coordinating effectively. The choice of supreme commander proves crucial to the entire enterprise. The role requires someone who can command respect from diverse national contingents, who possesses military skill and experience, who can make difficult decisions under pressure, and who can inspire men to fight against an enemy with a fearsome reputation. Pope Pius V and King Philip II settle on Don Juan of Austria, the illegitimate half-brother of the Spanish king. At just 24 years old, Don Juan might seem an unlikely choice to lead the greatest Christian naval force assembled in generations, but his selection proves inspired. Born the illegitimate son of Holy Roman Emperor Charles V and a German woman, Don Juan has been raised at the Spanish court and trained in military matters from youth. Despite his illegitimate birth, he carries imperial blood, which gives him legitimacy in the eyes of the aristocratic commanders he must lead. Don Juan possesses qualities that transcend his youth and relative inexperience. He radiates charisma, inspiring loyalty and confidence in those around him. He listens to experienced advisors, but makes his own decisions. He treats subordinates with respect, regardless of their nationality, avoiding the petty rivalries and national prejudices that might fragment his diverse force. He demonstrates personal courage, leading from the front rather than commanding from safety. Perhaps most importantly, he believes absolutely in his mission and in the righteousness of his cause. This combination of personal magnetism, tactical flexibility, diplomatic skill, and unshakable conviction makes him the perfect commander for a coalition force where unity might dissolve under pressure. When Don Juan arrives in Messina in August 1571 to take command of the assembling fleet, he finds not a unified force but a collection of national contingents suspicious of each other and uncertain about their chances against the mighty Ottoman Navy. The assembly of the Christian fleet in Messina harbor represents an extraordinary logistical and diplomatic achievement. Ships arrive from across the Mediterranean. Spanish galleys from Barcelona and Naples, Venetian warships from the Adriatic, Genoese vessels, papal galleys, ships from Malta, Savoy, and smaller Italian states. Each contingent brings its own commanders, traditions, equipment, and tactical doctrines. The Venetians, with centuries of Mediterranean naval experience, consider themselves the preeminent maritime power and resent taking orders from a young Spanish commander. The Spanish, proud of their military prowess and their role as Christendom's principal defenders, view the Venetians as merchants playing at war. The smaller contingents worry about being sacrificed in battle to preserve the larger forces. National rivalries threaten to undermine the entire enterprise before a single shot is fired. Don Juan demonstrates his leadership skills immediately. He meets personally with commanders from each contingent, listening to their concerns, acknowledging their contributions, building personal relationships that transcend national divisions. He institutes a unified command structure while respecting the autonomy of individual national squadrons. He ensures that supplies are distributed fairly, that no contingent is favored over others, that every ship and sailor is treated as an essential part of the common cause. He organizes training exercises that bring crews from different nations together, building familiarity and trust. He addresses the assembled forces, speaking of honor, duty, and the sacred nature of their mission. Gradually, through force of personality and careful management, Don Juan transforms a fractious collection of rival contingents into something approaching a unified fleet. Among the diverse vessels gathering in Messina Harbor, 6 ships stand apart from the others, attracting curious stares and skeptical comments from veteran sailors. These are the galleasses, revolutionary Venetian warships that represent a radical departure from traditional Mediterranean naval design. To understand why these ships matter so profoundly, we must first understand the naval warfare that has dominated the Mediterranean for centuries. The standard warship is the galley, a long, narrow vessel powered primarily by oars, carrying a single cannon or ram at the bow, and relying ultimately on closing with the enemy and boarding. Galley warfare is essentially infantry combat conducted on water. The ship serves mainly as transportation, bringing soldiers close enough to fight hand-to-hand. Naval battles resemble land battles fought on floating platforms, decided by the skill and courage of soldiers rather than by firepower or naval tactics. The Venetians, as the Mediterranean's foremost maritime power, have spent centuries refining galley design and tactics. They understand better than anyone the strengths and limitations of traditional naval warfare. They also recognize that Ottoman galleys, manned by elite janissaries and powered by thousands of oarsmen, have proven consistently superior in the boarding actions that decide most battles. The Venetians need an advantage, something that can disrupt Ottoman tactics and neutralize their superiority in close combat. Their answer is the galleass, a hybrid vessel combining the oar power of a galley with the size and firepower of a sailing ship. Much larger than standard galleys, the galleasses mount numerous heavy cannon along their sides, on raised fighting platforms, and at bow and stern. They carry far more firepower than any galley, capable of delivering devastating broadsides that can cripple enemy vessels before they close for boarding. But the galleasses come with significant drawbacks that make many commanders skeptical of their value. They are slow and difficult to maneuver, unable to match the speed and agility of traditional galleys. Their deep draft limits where they can operate. They require large crews to manage both oars and sails. They are expensive to build and maintain. Most critically, they represent an unproven concept. The Venetians have built them based on theory and limited testing, but no one knows how they will perform in the chaos of actual battle against the Ottoman fleet. Traditional naval commanders, trained in galley warfare and accustomed to tactics developed over generations, view these strange hybrid vessels with suspicion. They see expensive experiments that might prove useless in battle, resources that would have been better spent on more conventional galleys. Don Juan, however, recognizes something that escapes more conservative commanders. He understands that fighting the Ottomans using traditional tactics plays to their strengths. Ottoman galleys are at least as good as Christian galleys, and Ottoman janissaries are superior to most Christian infantry in close combat. To win, the Holy League needs to change the nature of the battle itself, to create conditions that neutralize Ottoman advantages and exploit potential weaknesses. The galleasses offer exactly this opportunity. Don Juan conceives a bold tactical innovation. He will position the 6 galleasses at the front of his battle line, using them as floating fortresses that the Ottoman fleet must pass. As the Ottomans attack, charging forward in their traditional manner to close for boarding, they will be forced to approach through a devastating crossfire from the galleasses' heavy artillery. This fire will disrupt their formations, damage their ships, kill their soldiers, and throw their attack into chaos before the main fleets even engage. The plan is brilliant, but risky. If the galleasses fail to deliver the expected firepower, if they are bypassed or quickly neutralized, Don Juan's entire fleet could be thrown into confusion with these slow, unwieldy vessels blocking their own movement. Many of Don Juan's advisors urge caution, suggesting that the galleasses be held in reserve or positioned safely at the rear of the fleet. But Don Juan trusts his instincts. He orders the galleasses positioned prominently at the front center of his battle line, impossible for the Ottomans to avoid or ignore. Everything will depend on whether these revolutionary vessels can perform as designed in the crucible of battle against the most formidable navy in the world. While the Christian forces assemble and train in Sicily, the Ottoman fleet operates with the confidence of long dominance. Ali Pasha, the Ottoman commander, leads a force of approximately 300 galleys, a massive armada by any standard, representing the naval might of the world's most powerful empire. Ali Pasha is an experienced commander, a capable administrator, and a courageous leader, but he also operates within tactical doctrines that have succeeded for generations. Why should he question methods that have delivered victory after victory? The Ottoman approach to naval warfare is straightforward and brutally effective. Use superior numbers to envelop the enemy fleet, close rapidly to minimize the effectiveness of any artillery, board aggressively using elite Janissary infantry, and overwhelm resistance through superior close-quarters combat. This approach has worked against Venetians, Spanish, Genoese, and every other Mediterranean naval power. Ali Pasha sees no reason it will not work again. Ottoman intelligence provides detailed information about the Christian fleet assembling in Messina. Ali Pasha knows the approximate size of the enemy force, understands that it is a coalition of diverse powers, recognizes that unity might fracture under pressure. He knows the Christians have appointed a young, inexperienced commander with more noble blood than battlefield experience. Reports mention strange large ships in the Christian fleet, but these are dismissed as Venetian peculiarities, probably slower and less maneuverable than standard galleys, easy targets for his experienced captains. Ali Pasha's primary concern is locating and engaging the Christian fleet before it disperses or retreats. He wants a decisive battle that will destroy Christian naval power in a single engagement, opening the entire Mediterranean to Ottoman control and continuing the empire's expansion into the heart of Europe. The strategic situation favors aggressive action by the Ottomans. The fall of Cyprus has given them a forward base in the eastern Mediterranean. Christian Europe remains divided, and the Holy League might dissolve, if not engaged quickly. Winter approaches, and naval campaigning will become difficult once the autumn storms begin. Ali Pasha understands that a decisive victory now will eliminate Christian resistance for years and possibly forever. He sails his massive fleet westward from Constantinople with confidence, expecting to encounter and destroy an enemy force that cannot possibly match Ottoman numbers, experience, and fighting prowess. The coming battle, in Ali Pasha's calculation, will be difficult but ultimately successful. Another demonstration of Ottoman superiority and another chapter in the empire's long history of military triumph. On October 6, 1571, Don Juan receives intelligence that the Ottoman fleet has been sighted moving westward through the Gulf of Corinth. The moment of decision has arrived. The Christian fleet, approximately 208 galleys and the 6 galleasses, sets sail from its anchorage and moves to intercept the Ottoman force. The night before battle, Don Juan moves through the fleet, visiting ships, speaking with commanders and common sailors alike, preparing his diverse force psychologically for the ordeal ahead. He reminds them of their mission, of the Christian population suffering under Ottoman rule, of the atrocities committed at Cyprus, of the sacred nature of their cause. He speaks of honor and duty, of their families and homelands depending on their courage, of the justice of their cause, and the divine favor that accompanies righteous warriors. Most powerfully, he reminds them that they fight not for personal glory or national advantage, but for the survival of their civilization, their faith, and their way of life. As dawn breaks on October 7, 1571, the two fleets sight each other near the entrance to the Gulf of Patras. The sun rises over the mountains of Greece, illuminating a scene of terrible grandeur. The Ottoman fleet stretches across the horizon, an enormous crescent-shaped formation of galleys extending for miles, their oars rising and falling in rhythm, their banners bright in the morning light. It is the largest assemblage of naval power the Mediterranean has witnessed in generations, a sight designed to inspire terror and despair in any enemy. Christian sailors who have never seen such a massive fleet before feel their courage waver, their hands tremble on weapons and oars. How can they possibly prevail against such overwhelming force? Don Juan has anticipated this psychological moment. As the Ottoman fleet approaches, he orders his own ships into battle formation, a long line stretching across the Gulf, subdivided into left-wing, center, and right-wing commands, with a reserve force held back. Most critically, he positions the 6 galleasses in front of the center division, spaced at regular intervals, forming a barrier that the Ottomans must pass to reach the main Christian battle line. These floating fortresses are anchored in position, their guns loaded, and their crews ready. Don Juan then does something extraordinary for a supreme commander. He boards his flagship, the Real, and has himself rowed along the entire battle line so every ship in his fleet can see him. He stands at the bow in full armor, clearly visible, carrying the battle standard blessed by the Pope himself. The message is unmistakable. He will share their danger, fight alongside them, lead from the front rather than commanding from safety. The Ottoman fleet advances with confidence, their enormous numbers making their commanders believe the outcome is foreordained. Ali Pasha has positioned himself in the center with the strongest ships and best troops, planning to break through the Christian center while his wings envelop the enemy flanks. It is a proven tactical approach, combining frontal assault with flanking maneuvers to surround and destroy the enemy fleet. As the distance closes, Ottoman crews can see the Christian formation, can count the ships, can assess the opposition. They see they outnumber the Christians significantly. They see the familiar galleys, the types of ships they have defeated dozens of times before. Some notice the strange large vessels positioned prominently in the center, but these are curiosities rather than threats, probably Venetian merchant ships pressed into military service, almost certainly slow and vulnerable. The first guns fire at approximately 10 in the morning. The range closes to a few hundred yards and the galleasses open fire with their heavy cannon. The sound is tremendous, rolling across the water like thunder, startling men on both sides who have never heard such concentrated firepower at sea. The effect is even more dramatic than the sound. Heavy cannonballs slam into the leading Ottoman galleys with devastating force, smashing through wooden hulls, snapping oars like twigs, dismounting guns, killing soldiers and oarsmen. The Ottomans have experienced artillery fire before, but nothing like this. Not this concentration, not this accuracy, not this rate of fire. The galleasses have multiple gun decks, dozens of cannon firing in coordinated broadsides that create killing zones through which the Ottoman fleet must advance. Ships that moments before were rowing confidently toward the enemy now find themselves crippled, listing, sinking, or in chaos as their crews struggle with casualties and damage. Ali Pasha faces an immediate crisis. His battle plan depends on closing quickly to engage in hand-to-hand combat where Ottoman superiority is decisive. But the galleasses are creating an impassable barrier of fire. Ships that attempt to row past are battered by multiple broadsides from different angles. The galleasses are anchored, stable gun platforms, while the Ottoman galleys are moving targets trying to maintain formation while under fire. The accuracy and destructiveness of the artillery exceed anything Ali Pasha anticipated. He must make a decision quickly, attempt to silence the galleasses, try to row around them despite the risk of disrupting his formation, or press forward directly through the fire and accept the casualties. every option carries serious risks, and every minute of delay allows the Christian guns to inflict more damage. The Ottoman response demonstrates both their courage and the limitations of their tactical doctrine. Rather than maneuver around the galleasses or withdraw to reconsider strategy, the Ottoman captains do what they have always done: attack directly, trusting in superior numbers and the bravery of their soldiers. This is the response their entire military culture has conditioned them for, the response that has succeeded for generations. The leading galleys continue forward, absorbing terrible punishment from the galleasses' guns, their formations becoming increasingly disordered as damaged ships slow or veer out of line, colliding with vessels behind them, creating chaos in the Ottoman center. The janissaries aboard these ships display their legendary courage, standing ready for boarding actions even as cannonballs smash through their ranks. But courage, no matter how magnificent, cannot overcome the physical reality of heavy artillery fire against wooden ships filled with men. The psychological impact of the galleasses' firepower proves as significant as the physical damage. Ottoman sailors and soldiers, accustomed to their own invincibility, find themselves facing an enemy that kills at a distance with terrifying effectiveness. The carefully maintained formations begin to break down as ships maneuver to avoid the worst of the fire, as damaged vessels fall out of line, as the confidence that comes from long dominance begins to crack. The Ottoman fleet, which minutes before advanced with the certainty of predators moving toward helpless prey, now finds itself in confusion, its captains making independent decisions rather than following a coordinated plan. Its soldiers dying before they can come to grips with the enemy, its much-vaunted tactical superiority neutralized by an entirely unexpected weapon. Don Juan watches from the Real as his gamble pays spectacular dividends. The galleasses are performing beyond his most optimistic expectations, disrupting the entire Ottoman attack, buying time for his main battle line to prepare, inflicting casualties and damage that shift the psychological balance before the main engagement even begins. But he also understands that the galleasses alone cannot win the battle. They are disrupting the Ottoman attack, but hundreds of Ottoman galleys remain combat effective, and once they pass the galleasses and engage the Christian battle line, the outcome will depend on traditional galley warfare, close combat, boarding actions, the clash of infantry on bloodied decks. The real battle is only beginning. As the Ottoman fleet struggles past the galleasses, absorbing terrible losses, but maintaining sufficient cohesion to reach the main Christian line, the battle transforms into the brutal close-quarters combat that has decided Mediterranean naval conflicts for centuries. The two fleets crash together in a collision of wood, metal, and flesh that extends for miles across the Gulf. Ottoman galleys, despite their losses, still outnumber the Christians and fight with desperate courage. Janissaries board Christian vessels, their scimitars flashing in the October sun. Christian soldiers fight back with sword, pike, and arquebus. Ships locked together in death grips, their crews battling across connected decks. The water between vessels becomes choked with debris, bodies, and men struggling to swim to safety. The noise is overwhelming. The clash of steel, the screams of wounded men, the crack of arquebuses, the shouts of officers trying to maintain order in the chaos. The battle develops differently in each of the three main sectors. On the Christian right wing, the Venetian commander Giovanni Andrea Doria finds himself engaged with the Ottoman left wing under Ulugh Ali, a former Italian slave who converted to Islam and rose to become one of the Ottoman Empire's most skilled naval commanders. Ulugh Ali recognizes that the Christian right wing is slightly extended, trying to prevent being flanked, and he maneuvers skillfully to exploit this vulnerability. His ships attack the junction between Doria's squadron and the center, attempting to break through and attack the Christian fleet from behind. Doria responds by pulling back slightly, refusing to be drawn into an isolated engagement where he might be surrounded. The maneuvering in this sector is more sophisticated than the brutal frontal collision occurring in the center, a chess match between two skilled commanders rather than a straightforward test of strength. On the Christian left wing, Agostino Barbarigo commands the Venetian squadron facing the Ottoman right wing, led by Mehmed Sirocco. This section of the battle becomes a savage close-quarters fight complicated by geography. The Ottoman right wing attempts to use the shallower water near the Greek coast to outflank the Christian left, but Barbarigo has anticipated this and positioned his ships to prevent the maneuver. The fighting here is particularly brutal, with Barbarigo himself struck by arrows and severely wounded early in the engagement. Despite their commander's injury, the Venetian left wing holds position, gradually gaining the upper hand through superior gunnery and disciplined fighting. Mehmed Sirocco's galley is eventually surrounded and captured, and the Ottoman commander killed in the desperate fighting. The collapse of the Ottoman right wing removes one entire sector of their fleet from effective action. But the decisive action occurs in the center, where Don Juan aboard the Real confronts Ali Pasha aboard the Sultana. This is more than a tactical engagement between two sections of opposing fleets. It is a symbolic confrontation between the two civilizations, the two faiths, the two visions of Mediterranean order. Both commanders recognize the significance of the moment. If Don Juan's center breaks, the entire Christian fleet may collapse despite successes on the wings. If Ali Pasha's center is defeated, the Ottoman fleet loses its cohesion and leadership. Both commanders lead from the front, exposing themselves to danger, inspiring their men through personal example. The Real and Sultana maneuver toward each other through the chaos of battle, both commanders seeking decisive action. The two flagships collide with tremendous force, their crews immediately grappling across the connected decks. Don Juan leads his Spanish soldiers and knights personally, fighting with sword in hand at the forefront of the boarding action. Ali Pasha responds with his own contingent of elite janissaries, the finest soldiers in the Ottoman army, meeting the Spanish rush with disciplined courage. For a time, the outcome hangs in perfect balance. Spanish soldiers fight with religious fervor and personal devotion to their young commander. Janissaries fight with professional skill and the confidence of countless victories. Men die in horrific numbers, their blood slicking the decks, their bodies piling up in the confined fighting space. The battle on the two flagships becomes a microcosm of the larger struggle. Faith against faith, East against West, two military traditions tested to destruction in close combat. Don Juan's personal leadership proves decisive at the critical moment. As the fighting reaches its peak, with the outcome uncertain and both sides exhausted, Don Juan rallies his men for one final push. He fights not as a distant commander, but as a common soldier, his armor dented by blows, his sword red with blood, his presence at the front inspiring men to efforts beyond their normal limits. The Spanish surge forward in a renewed assault that finally breaks Janissary resistance. Ali Pasha, fighting courageously to the last, is killed in the brutal melee. His head is cut off and displayed on a pike, signaling to the Ottoman fleet that their commander is dead and their center is broken. The death of Ali Pasha sends shockwaves through the Ottoman fleet, visible even in the chaos of battle. Ottoman captains who moments before fought with determination now face a terrible decision: continue fighting against increasingly unfavorable odds, or attempt to withdraw, while withdrawal remains possible. The Ottoman military culture emphasizes courage and persistence, dishonoring commanders who retreat unnecessarily. But it also values preserving forces for future campaigns. With their supreme commander dead, their center broken, their right wing collapsed, and only their left wing under Ulugh Ali maintaining coherent resistance, the rational decision is clear. But rationality and emotion diverge in the heat of battle, especially for warriors raised to believe themselves invincible. The Ottoman fleet begins to fragment. Some captains continue fighting with desperate courage, their ships locked in boarding actions they cannot disengage from even if they wished. Others recognize that the battle is lost and attempt to break away, rowing frantically toward the open water where they might escape. Still others, Their ships damaged or their crews depleted surrender to nearby Christian vessels. Ulugh Ali, the most capable Ottoman commander remaining, recognizes that continued engagement means annihilation. He successfully disengages his squadron on the Ottoman left wing, capturing several Christian galleys in the process to cover his withdrawal, and escapes with about 30 Ottoman ships. His withdrawal, while militarily sound, leaves the rest of the Ottoman fleet to its fate. The Christian forces, sensing victory, press their advantage with renewed energy. Exhausted men find new strength. Wounded fighters return to combat. Ships that were defending desperately now attack aggressively. The battle devolves into a series of individual ship actions across miles of water, with Christian vessels hunting down Ottoman galleys trying to escape. The fighting continues for hours past the breaking of the Ottoman center, each individual combat a small drama of courage, desperation, and mortality. Christian soldiers, many of whom entered battle terrified of the legendary Ottoman forces, now discover their enemies are men like themselves, capable of defeat, vulnerable to wounds, subject to panic and fear. As afternoon wears into evening, the magnitude of the Christian victory becomes apparent. The Ottoman fleet, which entered battle with approximately 300 galleys, has suffered catastrophic losses. Contemporary accounts vary in specific numbers, but the general picture is clear. Between 150 and 200 Ottoman galleys are captured or destroyed. Tens of thousands of Ottoman soldiers and sailors are killed or captured. Perhaps most significantly from a moral perspective, the Christian forces liberate approximately 12,000 Christian galley slaves who had been chained to Ottoman oars. Men who never expected to see freedom again, now finding themselves liberated by their co-religionists. The prisoners include men from across Christian Europe, captured in previous battles or raids, condemned to backbreaking labor until death. Their liberation adds an emotional dimension to the victory, transforming it from a mere military success into a rescue and redemption. Christian losses, while substantial, are dramatically lower than Ottoman casualties. The Holy League loses approximately 15 galleys and suffers around 8,000 casualties killed and wounded. These are serious losses that grieve the victorious fleet, but they pale in comparison to Ottoman casualties. The disparity reflects the effectiveness of the galleasses' initial bombardment, which crippled Ottoman formations before the main engagement, and the collapse of Ottoman morale following Ali Pasha's death, which turned a hard-fought battle into a rout. Don Juan himself is wounded in the fighting, taking an arrow wound to his leg, but he refuses treatment until the battle is clearly won, continuing to command and inspire his forces even while injured. As darkness falls over the Gulf of Patras, the Christian fleet surveys the aftermath of history's last great galley battle. The water is choked with debris, broken oars, shattered masts, bodies of the dead from both sides. Damaged ships limp toward shore. Medical teams move among the wounded, providing what comfort and treatment they can with the limited medicine of the era. Prisoners are secured, plunder is collected, captured ships are assessed for seaworthiness. The victorious fleet is exhausted, bloodied, and sobered by the cost of victory, but also elated by the magnitude of their triumph. They have accomplished what many believed impossible. They have decisively defeated the Ottoman fleet, the previously invincible naval force that had dominated the Mediterranean for generations. The strategic significance of the Battle of Lepanto becomes clearer in the days and weeks following the engagement. The immediate effect is the elimination of Ottoman naval superiority in the Mediterranean. The destroyed ships can eventually be replaced. The Ottoman Empire possesses the resources and shipyards to rebuild its fleet, but the aura of invincibility is shattered permanently. Christian sailors and soldiers who previously feared Ottoman forces now know from direct experience that they can be beaten. The liberation of Cyprus becomes impossible with the Ottoman fleet destroyed, but future Ottoman naval operations will proceed with less confidence and more caution. Most importantly, the Ottoman expansion into the Mediterranean is halted. The dream of controlling the entire sea, of using naval dominance to support further land conquests into Europe must be reconsidered. The psychological and political effects ripple across both Christian Europe and the Ottoman Empire. In Christian lands, news of the victory sparks celebrations of an intensity not seen in generations. Church bells ring in cities from Madrid to Rome to Venice. The Pope orders special masses of thanksgiving. Artists begin creating paintings commemorating the battle. Poets compose verses celebrating the victory. Don Juan becomes an instant hero throughout Catholic Europe. His name spoken with reverence and admiration. The Holy League, which many had predicted would collapse under the strain of battle or in disputes over the spoils of victory, holds together in the immediate aftermath, basking in shared triumph. For a brief moment, Christian Europe glimpses what might be possible if its fractious kingdoms could unite against common threats. In the Ottoman Empire, the defeat provokes shock, anger, and a determination to rebuild. Sultan Selim II dismisses the losses as temporary, famously remarking that while the Christians have singed his beard, he has cut off their arm, referring to the still occupied Cyprus. This bravado masks genuine concern about the implications of the defeat. The Ottoman Empire has suffered major defeats before and recovered. But this is different. A decisive naval defeat against a coalition of supposedly inferior enemies, using innovative tactics the Ottomans failed to anticipate. Ottoman military thinkers begin reassessing their naval doctrines, questioning whether traditional galley warfare remains viable against enemies with superior artillery. Don Juan of Austria returns to Italy as a conquering hero, greeted with triumph in city after city. His entry into Naples and later Rome resembles a Roman triumph from antiquity, with crowds lining the streets, nobles competing to host him, and the Pope personally blessing him for his service to Christendom. At just 24 years old, he has achieved a military victory that established commanders would envy, and his fame spreads across Europe. Marriage proposals arrive from noble families seeking to ally themselves with the victor of Lepanto. Kings and princes send congratulations and offers of employment. Artists paint his portrait, writers compose epics in his honor, and his name becomes synonymous with Christian military success against Islamic powers. For a young man of illegitimate birth, who might have lived his life in the shadows of legitimate princes, this represents a remarkable elevation. But the political realities of 16th century Europe prove more complex and frustrating than the straightforward challenges of battle. Don Juan desires to follow up the victory at Lepanto with continued campaigns against the Ottomans, proposing attacks on Ottoman territories in North Africa, operations to liberate Christian populations under Ottoman rule, and sustained pressure to roll back Ottoman conquests. However, the unity of purpose that temporarily united the Holy League in the face of imminent threat begins to dissolve in the aftermath of victory. Venice, having lost Cyprus but preserved its other Mediterranean possessions, calculates that continued warfare is expensive and risky, potentially jeopardizing its profitable trade relationships with Ottoman territories. The Venetians begin secret negotiations with the Ottomans, seeking a separate peace that will allow commerce to resume. Spain, the other major power in the Holy League, faces its own strategic dilemmas. King Philip II confronts multiple challenges: rebellion in the Netherlands, competition with France, religious conflicts, and the constant demands of maintaining a global empire stretching from Europe to the Americas to the Philippines. The Spanish king appreciates the significance of Lepanto, but also understands that sustained naval warfare in the Mediterranean requires resources he needs elsewhere. Moreover, Philip views his half-brother's growing fame with mixed feelings. Pride in the family victory combined with concern that Don Juan's ambitions might become problematic for Spanish interests. Rather than supporting Don Juan's proposed Mediterranean campaigns, Philip diverts his attention to other theaters, eventually sending him to the Netherlands to suppress the Dutch revolt. The Holy League, that remarkable coalition forged through papal diplomacy and desperate necessity, begins to fracture as each member pursues its own interests. The smaller Italian states, having contributed to the victory, now return their attention to local concerns and traditional rivalries. The Papal States lack the resources to sustain major military operations without Spanish and Venetian support. Genoa focuses on commercial opportunities. The Knights of Malta return to their traditional role of raiding Ottoman shipping and defending their island fortress. By 1573, the Holy League exists largely on paper, its practical cooperation dissolved by the centrifugal forces that always threaten to pull apart coalitions once the immediate crisis has passed. Venice formally concludes peace with the Ottoman Empire, accepting the loss of Cyprus in exchange for resumption of trade, to the outrage of those who believed Lepanto should mark the beginning of a sustained counter-offensive. Don Juan's subsequent career demonstrates the frustration of military success without political power. Sent to the Netherlands in 1576 to suppress the Dutch revolt, he finds himself in a far more complicated situation than the straightforward naval battle at Lepanto. The Dutch rebellion combines religious conflict, national aspirations, and international power politics in ways that admit no clear military solution. Don Juan achieves some battlefield successes but lacks the resources and political support to decisively resolve the conflict. His health, never robust after his wound at Lepanto, deteriorates in the damp climate of the Low Countries. In 1578, at just 33 years old, the hero of Lepanto dies of fever in a military camp near Namur, his grand ambitions unfulfilled, his potential unrealized. His death removes from the European stage one of the few commanders who might have continued effective resistance to Ottoman expansion. The longer-term consequences of the Battle of Lepanto prove complex and subject to historical debate. In the immediate strategic sense, the battle failed to achieve lasting results commensurate with the magnitude of the victory. The Ottoman Empire rebuilt its fleet with remarkable speed, launching approximately 200 new galleys within a year of the defeat. Cyprus remained in Ottoman hands. Ottoman power in the Mediterranean, while checked, was not broken. Within a few years, Ottoman fleets again operated throughout the Mediterranean with confidence. Some historians have argued that Lepanto was therefore a strategic failure, despite being a tactical triumph, a spectacular victory that changed nothing fundamental about the balance of power between Christian Europe and the Ottoman Empire. However, this assessment misses the deeper significance of what occurred on October 7, 1571. While the immediate strategic situation may have been restored relatively quickly, the psychological and technological implications of Lepanto echoed for generations. The myth of Ottoman invincibility, that intangible but powerful factor that had intimidated Christian forces and emboldened Ottoman commanders, was permanently shattered. Christian states learned that Ottoman forces could be defeated through proper preparation, innovative tactics, and unified command. The demonstration that coalition warfare among Christian powers, despite their deep divisions, could achieve results when facing existential threats provided a model for future cooperation. Most importantly, the role of the galleasses in disrupting traditional Ottoman tactics pointed toward the future of naval warfare. The galleasses themselves did not revolutionize naval warfare immediately. They were too expensive, too slow, too specialized for most purposes. The Mediterranean continued to see galley warfare for decades after Lepanto. But the principle they represented, that artillery firepower could disrupt traditional boarding tactics, that naval battles could be decided by long-range weapons rather than close combat, planted seeds that would eventually transform naval warfare completely. Within a century, the age of the galley would end across most of the world's oceans, replaced by sailing ships with powerful gun batteries that fought at range rather than closing for boarding. The galleasses at Lepanto served as a bridge between the ancient world of galley warfare and the modern age of line-of-battle ships that would dominate naval conflict into the 20th century. The technological evolution of naval warfare accelerated in the decades following Lepanto as military thinkers digested the lessons of the battle. The fundamental insight that firepower could prove decisive in naval combat encouraged continued experimentation with artillery-focused ship designs and tactics. English and Dutch naval architects, operating in the Atlantic rather than the Mediterranean, developed sailing warships that mounted dozens of cannons along their sides, creating the ship of the line that would dominate naval warfare until the age of steam. These vessels, while evolutionary descendants of the galleass concept rather than direct copies, embodied the same principle. Naval battles would be decided by gunnery and seamanship rather than by boarding actions and hand-to-hand combat. The age of the galley, which had lasted for thousands of years from ancient times through the 16th century, was drawing to a close. The social and cultural impact of Lepanto extended beyond military matters into the realm of art, literature, and collective memory. The battle inspired an enormous outpouring of creative work across Catholic Europe. Titian, one of the greatest painters of the Renaissance, created a massive allegorical painting depicting the battle with religious symbolism. Veronese painted the allegory of the Battle of Lepanto, showing the Virgin Mary presiding over the Christian victory. Poets across Europe composed verses celebrating the triumph, most famously Miguel de Cervantes, who fought in the battle as a Spanish soldier and was seriously wounded, losing the use of his left hand. Cervantes referred to Lepanto in his later writings as the greatest event witnessed by past or present ages, and his participation in the battle influenced his subsequent literary work, including Don Quixote. The anniversary of the battle, October 7th, became a feast day in the Catholic calendar. Our Lady of Victory, later renamed Our Lady of the Rosary, commemorating the Christian victory and attributing it to divine intervention through the prayers of Christians across Europe. This religious dimension reinforced the perception that Lepanto represented not merely a military victory, but a civilizational and spiritual triumph. Churches across Catholic Europe commissioned artwork commemorating the battle, installed plaques describing the victory, and held annual services of thanksgiving. The battle became embedded in Catholic collective memory as a moment when Christian civilization faced existential threat and, through faith and unity, prevailed against overwhelming odds. For the Ottoman Empire, Lepanto represented a turning point in a different sense. The rapid rebuilding of the fleet after the disaster demonstrated the empire's continued strength and resources, but the defeat marked the high water mark of Ottoman expansion into the Mediterranean. Never again would Ottoman fleets operate with the same confidence and ambition that characterized the era before Lepanto. The empire remained a formidable power for centuries. It would not finally collapse until World War I, but its expansion was increasingly focused on land campaigns rather than naval dominance. The dream of making the Mediterranean an Ottoman lake, of using naval power to project force into the heart of Catholic Europe, died at Lepanto even if the empire itself survived and prospered. The Battle of Lepanto also highlighted the critical importance of leadership, unity, and innovation in military affairs, lessons that remain relevant centuries later. Don Juan of Austria demonstrated that young, relatively inexperienced commanders with the right qualities can succeed where older, more cautious leaders might fail. His willingness to embrace innovation in the form of the galleasses, his ability to unite a fractious coalition through personal leadership, and his courage in leading from the front combined to achieve victory against a numerically superior and previously dominant enemy. The contrast between Don Juan's adaptive, innovative approach and the Ottoman reliance on traditional methods that had previously succeeded illustrates the danger of assuming that past success guarantees future victory. The importance of coalition warfare, despite its inherent difficulties, stands out as another crucial lesson. The Holy League succeeded at Lepanto precisely because it brought together the naval expertise of Venice, the military might of Spain, the financial resources of the Papal States, and the contributions of smaller powers into a unified force under a single commander. Each member brought different strengths, and the combination proved greater than the sum of its parts. The subsequent dissolution of the League after the immediate threat passed demonstrates the challenge of maintaining coalitions, but also the reality that sometimes temporary unity is sufficient to achieve critical objectives. The model of Christian powers setting aside their differences to confront a common threat would be repeated in various forms over subsequent centuries. The fate of the liberated galley slaves provides a human dimension to the victory often overlooked in accounts focusing on tactics and strategy. The 12,000 Christian captives freed from Ottoman galleys represented individuals from across Europe, captured sailors, coastal villagers taken in raids, soldiers from earlier battles, who had been condemned to horrific labor until death. Their unexpected liberation transformed their personal narratives from tragedy to miraculous rescue. Many returned to their homelands after years or even decades of captivity, bringing stories of their experiences that reinforced European perceptions of Ottoman cruelty and the righteousness of resisting Ottoman expansion. The liberation also highlighted the brutal realities of galley warfare for the oarsmen, whether slave or free, who provided the muscle power that drove the ships and who were often the first casualties when galleys engaged in battle. The technological implications of Lepanto extend beyond naval warfare into the broader question of how innovation disrupts established military doctrines. The Ottomans entered the battle with tactics and formations that had succeeded for generations. They had refined galley warfare to a high art, developing training, tactics, and logistics that had proven superior in countless engagements. This very success created a form of institutional conservatism. Why innovate when current methods work so well? The Venetian development of the galleasses, born from the recognition that traditional tactics favored the Ottomans, represents the kind of innovative thinking that desperate circumstances sometimes inspire. The lesson that technological or tactical innovation can overcome conventional superiority remains relevant in military affairs, as does the warning that past success can breed dangerous complacency about future challenges. The Battle of Lepanto occupies a unique position in European historical consciousness as the last great galley battle, and simultaneously as a harbinger of the modern age of naval warfare. It represents the culmination of thousands of years of development in oar-powered warships, while simultaneously pointing toward the future dominance of sail and artillery. In this sense, Lepanto serves as a hinge moment in military history, when one era of warfare gave way to another, when ancient methods met modern innovation, and when the outcome demonstrated that the future belonged to firepower, technology, and tactical innovation, rather than to traditional methods, however refined and proven. The strategic stalemate that followed Lepanto, Ottoman recovery and continued power balanced by Christian awareness that the empire could be resisted, characterized Mediterranean politics for the next century. Neither side could achieve decisive dominance. The Ottomans continued to be a major power, but increasingly focused their attention on other frontiers, particularly against Persia in the east and along the Russian frontier in the north. Christian European powers, while celebrating the victory at Lepanto, remained too divided by national interests, religious conflicts, and competing ambitions to sustain unified pressure on the Ottoman Empire. The result was a de facto partition of influence in the Mediterranean that persisted for generations, with neither side able to expel the other, but both maintaining significant presence and power. The memory of Lepanto faded somewhat in subsequent centuries as new conflicts and new concerns captured European attention. The 30 Years' War devastated Central Europe and superseded Ottoman threats as the primary European concern for a generation. The rise of Atlantic powers, England, France, the Netherlands, shifted the focus of naval warfare from the Mediterranean to the world's oceans. The development of new technologies, tactics, and ship types made galley warfare increasingly obsolete, consigning Lepanto to the category of historical curiosity rather than immediate strategic relevance. Yet the battle never entirely disappeared from European consciousness, preserved in art, literature, and religious observances, a reminder of a moment when Christian Europe faced existential threat and prevailed through unity, courage, and innovation. From a modern perspective, the Battle of Lepanto invites reflection on several enduring themes. The importance of innovation in military affairs stands out clearly. The Venetian galleasses, dismissed by traditionalists as expensive experiments, proved decisive in disrupting Ottoman tactics and enabling Christian victory. This pattern of innovative technologies or tactics defeating conventional superiority recurs throughout military history, from the English longbow at Crecy to the machine gun in World War I to precision-guided munitions in modern conflicts. The lesson that military establishments must continue to innovate even when current methods appear successful remains perpetually relevant, yet perpetually difficult to implement, given institutional inertia and the risks of unproven concepts. The challenge of coalition warfare, with all its difficulties and occasional successes, appears clearly in the formation and eventual dissolution of the Holy League. Uniting powers with different interests, histories, and cultures requires extraordinary diplomatic skill, compelling circumstances, and effective leadership. The Holy League succeeded at Lepanto because all three factors aligned temporarily: the Pope's diplomatic efforts, the existential threat posed by Ottoman expansion, and Don Juan's unifying leadership. The subsequent fracturing of the coalition demonstrates how difficult maintaining such unity proves when immediate threats recede and individual interests reassert themselves. Yet the achievement stands as proof that even deeply divided powers can cooperate effectively when circumstances demand, and leadership provides direction. The human dimensions of the conflict, the courage of soldiers on both sides, the suffering of galley slaves, the leadership of commanders, the diplomatic skills of negotiators, remind us that history is ultimately a human story rather than an abstract movement of impersonal forces. Don Juan of Austria, dying at 33 with his ambitions unfulfilled, represents the tragedy of potential cut short. The liberated galley slaves represent hope emerging from despair. The ordinary soldiers and sailors who fought and died on both sides represent individual courage and sacrifice in service of causes larger than themselves. Ali Pasha, dying courageously in defense of his flagship, represents honorable service to his empire, even in defeat. These individual stories, woven together, create the larger narrative of Lepanto. The Battle of Lepanto teaches us that single events, however dramatic and significant, rarely determine historical outcomes definitively. The immediate strategic situation was substantially restored within years of the battle. The Ottoman Empire remained powerful for centuries after its defeat. Yet the psychological and symbolic significance of the battle resonated far beyond its immediate military consequences. It demonstrated that the apparently unstoppable could be stopped, that innovation could triumph over tradition, that unity could overcome division, and that courage and skill could defeat superior numbers. These lessons, absorbed by contemporaries and remembered by subsequent generations, influenced decisions, strategies, and attitudes in ways that shaped history, even when the specific details of Lepanto faded from immediate consciousness. As we stand more than 4 centuries after that October morning when 2 fleets clashed in the Gulf of Patras, the Battle of Lepanto serves as a reminder of several timeless truths about human conflict and human societies. Innovation matters. New technologies and tactics can overturn established advantages. Unity matters. Divided powers that temporarily unite can accomplish what they could never achieve separately. Leadership matters. Skilled commanders who inspire confidence and make sound decisions can multiply the effectiveness of forces under their command. Courage matters. Ordinary people facing extraordinary challenges can rise to meet them when the cause is just and the leadership effective. And memory matters. The stories we tell ourselves about past challenges and triumphs shape how we understand ourselves and approach future challenges. The secret weapon that destroyed the Ottoman Navy at Lepanto was not merely the galleasses with their heavy artillery, though these played a crucial role. The real weapons were innovation in the face of conventional wisdom, unity despite deep divisions, leadership that inspired rather than merely commanded, and courage that persisted against daunting odds. These are the weapons that continue to shape history long after the wooden galleys and bronze cannons of 1571 have crumbled into dust. The Battle of Lepanto stands as a testament to what becomes possible when these weapons combine, when desperate circumstances force innovation, when existential threats compel unity, when exceptional leaders emerge at critical moments, and when ordinary people find the courage to face extraordinary challenges. This is why we remember Lepanto, and why its lessons remain relevant across the centuries that separate us from that decisive October day in 1571.